I watched from my kitchen window as the white delivery truck pulled up to my driveway in our quiet subdivision of Maple Ridge, Connecticut. And something told me this was about to go sideways. Not because anything was wrong with the delivery, but because I could already see Deborah Patterson standing on her front lawn 3 houses down with her phone raised like she was documenting a crime scene. My name is Kevin Garrison, and I had been living in this HOA-controlled neighborhood for exactly 8 months. 8 months of complaints about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall on inspection day, and my welcome mat apparently being too large according to some obscure bylaw from 1987. Deborah Patterson was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with a blonde bob haircut that never moved in the wind and a perpetual expression that suggested she had just smelled something offensive. The delivery truck belonged to my family business, Garrison Lumber and Supply. My father had started it 30 years ago, and now my brother Marcus ran the operations while I handled the commercial real estate side of things from home. I had ordered 3 cords of seasoned oak firewood because winter in Connecticut was no joke, and I actually used my fireplace, unlike the gas logs that most of my neighbors had installed for aesthetics. The driver today was Eddie Chen, a 24-year-old kid who had been working for us since he was 18. Good worker, reliable, always on time. I had texted him this morning to confirm the delivery window, and he had replied with a thumbs-up emoji at 7. It was now 2 in the afternoon, and I watched as Eddie hopped out of the truck, consulted his tablet, and started walking toward my driveway. He was wearing the company uniform, a navy blue polo with our logo embroidered on the chest. That was when Deborah struck. She walked across the street with the kind of determination usually reserved for Black Friday door-busters, her white tennis shoes slapping against the pavement. I could not hear what she was saying from inside, but I could see Eddie's confused expression as she gestured wildly at the truck, then at the neighborhood entrance, then at some papers she had pulled from the massive binder she carried everywhere. I sighed, set down my coffee, and headed for the front door. By the time I got outside, Deborah was in full lecture mode. Her voice carried across the lawn with that particular pitch that made dogs in neighboring yards start barking. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she was saying. "Commercial vehicles over a certain tonnage are explicitly prohibited from entering Maple Ridge between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays. It is in the Covenant, Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B." Eddie looked at me with relief as I approached. "Hey, Kevin. I got your firewood delivery, but this lady is saying I cannot unload it." "Cannot and will not," Deborah corrected, finally acknowledging my presence with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Kevin, surely you are aware of the rules regarding commercial deliveries." "I am aware that I can have firewood delivered to my house, Deborah. It is firewood for my fireplace, which is part of my house that I own." "The vehicle exceeds the weight restrictions," she insisted, tapping her binder. "And you did not submit a delivery request form 72 hours in advance, as required by the updated guidelines we distributed last month." "The guidelines that were slipped under doors with no official vote?" I asked. "Those guidelines," her expression hardened. "The board has the authority to implement reasonable restrictions without a full community vote. It says so in the original covenant." Eddie shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. "Look, I got 4 more deliveries today. Can I just unload this real quick? It will take like 15 minutes. "No," Deborah said firmly. "The vehicle will need to leave the premises immediately, or I will be forced to call a towing company and report this violation to the county." I felt my jaw clench. Deborah, you are not going to tow a delivery truck that is actively making a delivery to a resident who paid for a service. Watch me, she replied, already pulling out her phone. That was when things got interesting. Eddie, who had been patient up until this point, suddenly grinned. Hey, Kevin, you want me to just dump it at the neighborhood entrance? We could technically say it is on public property then, and you could move it yourself with a wheelbarrow or something. Deborah's head snapped toward him. You will do no such thing. That would be littering, and I will have the police here so fast. Or, Eddie continued, his grin widening, I could call Marcus and let him know that someone is refusing delivery of paid merchandise and threatening our company vehicle. Pretty sure that is grounds for all sorts of legal stuff. Deborah's eyes narrowed. Who is Marcus, my brother? I said quietly. He runs Garrison Lumber and Supply, the company Eddie works for, our family business. I watched the gears turn in Deborah's head as she processed this information. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. That is irrelevant, she finally managed. The rules apply to everyone equally, regardless of personal connections or business affiliations. Right, I said. So when you had that massive landscaping truck here for 6 hours last spring redoing your entire backyard, that was within the rules. That was approved by the board. The board, that is you, Carol Henderson, and your sister Linda. Deborah's face flushed red. This conversation is over. The truck leaves now or I am making calls. Eddie looked at me, and I could see he was getting genuinely annoyed now. Eddie was normally the most easygoing person I knew, but he had a temper when pushed too far. I had seen him get into it with a supplier once who tried to shortchange us on a lumber order. Tell you what, Eddie said, pulling out his own phone. I am going to call the police myself. Save you the trouble. We can let them sort out whether preventing a legitimate business delivery constitutes harassment or maybe even theft of services. Theft, Deborah laughed, but it sounded forced. That is absurd. Is it? I asked. I paid for delivery to my driveway. You are preventing that delivery. The firewood is technically mine since I paid for it. If you are preventing me from receiving my property, what would you call that? Deborah's flush deepened. You are twisting this around. I am simply enforcing the community standards that keep Maple Ridge a desirable place to live. A car pulled up behind the delivery truck, and I recognized Tom Sullivan, another resident who lived 2 streets over. He rolled down his window and called out, Hey, is there a problem? I have been sitting here for like 5 minutes. Just a moment, Deborah called back with forced cheerfulness. Then quieter to us, move the truck so traffic can pass. As soon as I unload, Eddie said firmly. You will not, Deborah. My voice came out harder than I intended. Here is what is going to happen. Eddie is going to unload 3 cords of firewood onto my driveway, which is my private property. It will take him 15 minutes, maybe 20. Traffic can go around if needed. And you are going to go back to your house and find something else to do with your afternoon. I most certainly will not, she snapped. And if that firewood gets unloaded, I will be issuing a formal violation notice with a $500 fine. For what? I demanded. Unauthorized delivery, failure to submit proper forms, and creating a traffic disruption. Eddie let out a low whistle. Lady, you are something else. Deborah turned her glare on him. Excuse me. I have been making deliveries for 6 years, Eddie said. All over Connecticut, all over New England really. I have dealt with HOAs, condo boards, business parks, you name it. And I have never, not once, had someone threaten to fine a homeowner for getting firewood delivered. Then clearly you have been working in neighborhoods with lower standards, Deborah retorted. That was it. That was the moment I decided I was done playing nice. Eddie, unload the firewood, I said calmly. Kevin, I am warning you, Deborah started. And I am warning you, I interrupted. You are about 2 seconds away from a harassment lawsuit. I have cameras on my house that have been recording this entire interaction. I have a witness in Eddie. I have documentation of payment for services. And I have about 8 months' worth of petty complaints and violations that I have been keeping records of because I knew something like this would eventually happen. Deborah's eyes widened slightly. You are recording this. My security system runs constantly. Front, back, and side yards. All motion activated, all cloud backed up. She looked uncertain for the first time. That does not change the rules. Then fine me, I said. Issue your violation. Send me the notice. And then I will see you in court, where we can discuss whether your rules are actually enforceable or whether you are just on a power trip. Tom honked his horn behind us, clearly frustrated with the delay. Eddie took my words as permission and headed back to the truck. He lowered the tailgate and started pulling out the loading ramp. Stop right there, Deborah demanded, but her voice had lost some of its authority. Eddie ignored her completely and began the process of unloading the firewood. He had it down to a science, using a hand truck to move the stacked bundles from the truck bed to my driveway in efficient trips. Deborah stood there, phone in hand, visibly trembling with either rage or frustration or both. Then she did something I did not expect. She called the police. I heard her speaking rapidly into her phone about a commercial vehicle violation, traffic obstruction, and possible property damage. She threw in words like aggressive driver and threatening behavior, which was completely fabricated, but I guess she figured she would embellish for effect. Eddie heard it too. He paused mid-unload and looked at me with raised eyebrows. Keep going, I told him. Let her call whoever she wants. Tom had given up waiting and carefully drove around the truck, giving us a sympathetic shake of his head as he passed. A few other neighbors had come out of their houses now, curious about the commotion. I recognized Beth and Jim Martinez from across the street, and old Mr. Patterson, no relation to Deborah despite the shared last name, from next door. What is going on? Beth called over. HOA business, Deborah called back quickly. Nothing to concern yourselves with. Looks like Kevin is getting firewood delivered, Jim observed. We had ours dropped off last week. Nobody said anything to us. Deborah's expression flickered with something that might have been panic. That was different circumstances. How? I asked loudly enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. Your delivery company is operating a vehicle that exceeds. Jim, how was your firewood delivered? I interrupted. Truck just like that one, Jim said, pointing at Eddie's vehicle. Maybe a little bigger, actually. Deborah looked like she wanted to argue, but clearly realized she was on shaky ground with witnesses accumulating. Eddie had about half the firewood unloaded when a Maple Ridge police cruiser pulled up. Officer Rachel Kimball stepped out, a woman in her 30s who I had seen around town at the coffee shop. She looked at the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had responded to way too many HOA disputes. Good afternoon, she said neutrally. I got a call about a disturbance. Deborah immediately launched into her rehearsed speech about commercial vehicle restrictions, covenant violations, and the general decline of neighborhood standards. She spoke so rapidly that Officer Kimball had to hold up a hand to slow her down. Okay, let me get this straight, the officer said. You called 911 because someone is having firewood delivered. It is a violation of community rules, Deborah insisted. Officer Kimball turned to me. Sir, do you live here? I do, Kevin Garrison. That is my house, I pointed. And this is your firewood delivery. It is. 3 cords of seasoned oak, paid in full. That is Eddie Chen. He works for my family business. The officer nodded slowly, then looked back at Deborah. "Madam, this is a civil HOA matter. Unless there is an actual crime being committed, I cannot do anything about covenant violations. You would need to go through your normal HOA channels." "He is creating a traffic hazard," Deborah tried. Officer Kimball glanced at the street, which was completely empty except for her cruiser and the delivery truck. "I do not see any traffic being hazarded. There was earlier. Tom Sullivan had to go around. Did he have an accident? Did anyone get hurt? Is the street blocked?" Deborah's mouth worked soundlessly. Officer Kimball sighed. "Look, folks, I get that HOAs have rules and people feel strongly about them. But calling 911 for a firewood delivery is not an appropriate use of emergency services." "Sir," she addressed Eddie, "how much longer on the delivery?" "Maybe 5 more minutes," Eddie said. He had kept working throughout the entire police interaction, which I appreciated. "Great. Finish up your delivery, and everyone can go about their day." "Madam," she looked at Deborah, "if you genuinely believe there is a covenant violation, you need to handle that through your HOA's normal procedures. Sending violation notices, having board meetings, that sort of thing. Not calling the police." "But he was being threatening," Deborah protested weakly. "Who was?" "The driver. He said he would call the police on me." Officer Kimball looked at Eddie, who shrugged. "I said I would call the police to sort out whether she could legally prevent a delivery." "That is not a threat. That is just saying I would call you guys." "Which he would have been within his rights to do," the officer confirmed. "Okay, is there anything else? Any actual emergency?" When Deborah did not respond, Officer Kimball nodded and headed back to her cruiser. "I am going to clear this call as unfounded. Everyone have a good day." As the police car pulled away, I could see Deborah's face cycling through several shades of red and purple. She looked at the small crowd of neighbors, at Eddie finishing the last of the delivery, and finally at me. "This is not over," she said quietly. "I imagine it is not," I agreed. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, binder clutched to her chest like a shield. Eddie secured the truck's tailgate and walked over to hand me the delivery receipt on his tablet. "Well, that was fun." "You good, man?" "Yeah, thanks for hanging in there." "No problem. Marcus is going to love this story." He grinned and headed back to the truck. As Eddie drove away, Jim and Beth walked over. "Sorry about all that," Beth said. "Deborah has been getting worse lately. She tried to tell us our Halloween decorations were too scary last year. They were just pumpkins." "She is on some kind of crusade," Jim added. "Ever since the Hendersons moved out last spring, she has been acting like she has to personally patrol the neighborhood for violations." "The Hendersons left because of her," Mr. Patterson chimed in. He had wandered over with his ancient golden retriever. "She sent them a violation notice every week for 2 months. Their kid's basketball hoop was apparently 3 inches too close to the street." "Why does everyone let her get away with it?" I asked. Jim shrugged. "Most people just pay the fines or fix whatever she complains about. It is easier than fighting. Plus, she has got Carol and Linda on the board, and they vote however she wants. The rest of us do not want to deal with being on the HOA board, so she runs unopposed every year." "That might need to change," I said. Beth's eyes lit up. "Are you thinking about running?" "I am thinking about a lot of things, starting with filing a formal complaint about today." We talked for a few more minutes before everyone dispersed. I spent the next hour stacking the firewood properly in the covered area I had built on the side of my house. It was good oak, properly seasoned, exactly what I had ordered. The whole delivery would have been completely routine if Deborah had not decided to make it her personal mission to stop it. That evening, I sat down at my computer and started documenting everything. I pulled the security footage from my cameras, which clearly showed the entire confrontation. I wrote out a timeline of events. I attached copies of my payment receipt to Garrison Lumber and Supply. Then I started going through the covenant documents for Maple Ridge. The HOA covenant was a document from 1985, back when the neighborhood was first developed. It covered basic things like maintaining your property, not operating a business that created excessive traffic, keeping up external appearances, stuff like that. There had been amendments over the years, usually voted on at annual meetings. The commercial vehicle restriction Deborah had cited was from an amendment passed in 2019. I found it in the archives. It stated that commercial vehicles over 26,000 pounds could not park overnight in the neighborhood without special permission. Park overnight. Nothing about deliveries. Nothing about daytime restrictions. The delivery request form she mentioned was from a memo that had been distributed last month, like I said. But when I checked the HOA bylaws, any new requirement that imposed potential fines needed to be voted on at a meeting with at least 60% of homeowners present or represented by proxy. There was no record of any such vote. In other words, Deborah had made it up. Or rather, she had created a requirement that had no actual authority behind it, then tried to enforce it as if it did. I compiled all of this into a formal complaint document. Then I looked up the contact information for the other board members, Carol Henderson and Linda Patterson, Deborah's sister. This was going to be interesting. The next morning, I sent my complaint via email and certified mail to all 3 board members. I also sent copies to the property management company that handled the administrative side of the HOA. In the email, I very politely but firmly outlined why Deborah's actions were not only inappropriate but potentially illegal, using words like harassment, abuse of authority, and restraint of trade. I did not expect a quick response, but I got one anyway. Linda Patterson called me at 8:30 in the morning, 2 days after the incident. "Mr. Garrison, this is Linda Patterson from the HOA board. I received your complaint. Thank you for getting back to me so quickly. I want to start by saying that I was not aware of the situation until I read your email. I have spoken with Deborah, and there seems to be some disagreement about what happened." "It is all on video," I said flatly. "From multiple angles. There is no disagreement about the facts." Linda hesitated. "Yes, well, Deborah feels that you were being deliberately confrontational and that your employee was disrespectful." "My employee was trying to do his job. Deborah threatened to have his truck towed and called the police on a legitimate business delivery." "The rules about commercial vehicles do not apply to daytime deliveries," I interrupted. "I have read the covenant multiple times now. The restriction is about overnight parking, and the delivery form requirement was never properly voted on, which means it is not actually enforceable." Another pause. "I would need to check with our attorney about that." "Please do. While you are at it, you might want to ask the attorney about the liability involved when an HOA board member prevents a resident from receiving paid services. Because that sounds a lot like tortious interference to me. Mr. Garrison, there is no need for threats." "I am not threatening. I am stating facts. Linda, I do not want to be in a war with the HOA. I just want to be left alone to live in my house and have firewood delivered when I need it. But if Deborah is going to keep inventing rules and harassing me for non-existent violations, we are going to have a problem." "What do you want?" Linda asked, and I could hear the fatigue in her voice. "I want a formal retraction of any threat of fines related to the firewood delivery. I want confirmation that the delivery form requirement is not actually binding until it has been properly voted on. And I want an assurance that I will not be targeted for retaliation because I pushed back. I will talk to the board. Thank you." She hung up, and I felt a small sense of victory. but I was not naive enough to think this was over. 2 days later, I received a letter in my mailbox. Not delivered by the postal service, just stuck in there by hand. It was from the HOA, printed on official letterhead. Dear Mr. Garrison, after reviewing the events of November 14th regarding the delivery of firewood to your property, the HOA board has determined that the following violations occurred: failure to submit advance notice of commercial delivery, creation of a traffic hazard, and verbal harassment of a board member. Total fines assessed, $1,500. Payment is due within 30 days. I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. They had actually done it. After everything, after the police had been called and found no issue, after I had pointed out that their rules were not even legitimate, they had doubled down and issued fines anyway. I called Linda Patterson back immediately. "I got your letter," I said when she answered. "Mr. Garrison, the board met and reviewed. The board met without notifying me. I am entitled to a hearing before fines are assessed. It says so right in the covenant." Deborah felt that given the documentation. What documentation? The security footage that shows her making up rules and threatening my delivery driver. Linda's voice got tighter. "Mr. Garrison, if you disagree with the fines, you can appeal them at the next board meeting." "When is that?" "January 15th. 2 months away. And the fine is due in 30 days. That is standard procedure." "No," I said firmly. "Standard procedure is that I get a hearing before fines are issued. Standard procedure is that you do not punish people for things that are not actually violations. This is retaliation, pure and simple." "I am sorry you feel that way." "I do not feel that way. That is what it is. And now I am going to do something I did not want to do." "What is that?" "I am going to lawyer up." I hung up before she could respond. That afternoon I called my attorney, Graham Foster. Graham had handled the closing when I bought my house and had done some work for Garrison Lumber over the years. He was in his 50s, experienced, and known for being thorough. "Kevin, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, from the initial firewood delivery through the latest fine letter. I emailed him all my documentation, including the security footage. He was quiet for a long moment after reviewing everything. Then he said, "This is one of the more blatant cases of HOA overreach I have seen in a while. So I am not crazy, not at all. They violated their own procedures, invented requirements that were never properly adopted, and are now retaliating against you for calling them out. The fact that the delivery was from your family business adds an extra layer of legal issues. They could be interfering with interstate commerce depending on how far your business operates. We deliver all over New England. Even better. Worse for them, I mean. Here is what I recommend. Let me send them a letter outlining the legal problems with their actions and demanding they rescind the fines. If they do not, we can file suit. It would be for declaratory relief, asking the court to rule that the fines are invalid and that the HOA has been acting beyond its authority." "How much is that going to cost me?" "Probably less than the fines if we go to court and win, which I think we would. Plus, there is a good chance they back down once they get a lawyer letter and realize you are serious." "Do it," I said. Graham's letter went out the next day via certified mail and email. It was 6 pages of dense legal language that basically said the HOA had screwed up in multiple ways and needed to fix it immediately. The response came from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Peter Walsh from a firm in Hartford. His letter was shorter and essentially argued that the board had broad discretion to enforce community standards and that my complaint was without merit. "They are going to make us go to court," Graham told me over the phone, which honestly surprises me. Usually, HOAs back down when they realize someone is willing to fight. The legal fees alone could bankrupt a small HOA. How big is Maple Ridge's HOA budget? I asked. Let me check the disclosure documents from when you bought your place. I heard papers rustling. Okay, they have about $80,000 in reserves. That is not terrible, but it is not enough to fund a long legal battle. Then, why are they pushing this? Pride, probably. Or Deborah has convinced the other board members that they will win. We filed the lawsuit the following week. Once it was filed, things moved into a different gear. There was a case number, scheduled hearings, formal discovery. The HOA had to turn over all their records related to the covenant amendments, board meetings, and enforcement actions. That was when things got really interesting. During discovery, Graham found that Deborah had been issuing fines to residents for years without proper board votes. The delivery form requirement I had been cited for. She had created it herself and just started enforcing it. There were at least a dozen other similar rules that had no actual authority behind them. More importantly, we found that Deborah had been pocketing some of the fine money. It was not obvious at first. The HOA's accounting was a mess, which apparently was not uncommon for small associations. But Graham brought in a forensic accountant who traced payments and deposits. Over the past 3 years, roughly $20,000 in fine revenue had gone missing. The money had been deposited into the HOA account, but then transferred out to pay for administrative expenses that did not actually exist. From there, the trail led to a personal account belonging to Deborah Patterson. This is embezzlement, Graham told me. We need to report this to the police. Will that help our case? It will destroy their case. They cannot exactly argue that they were properly enforcing rules when their board president was using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. We filed an amended complaint adding allegations of fraud and embezzlement. We also filed a police report with the Connecticut State Police, since the amounts involved crossed the threshold for felony charges. Things escalated quickly after that. Deborah was arrested on a Thursday morning. I was not there to see it, but Jim Martinez was out walking his dog and texted me a photo of the police car in front of her house. The arrest made the local news that evening. HOA president arrested for embezzlement was the headline on the Hartford station. The next board meeting was chaos. I attended, along with about 40 other residents who normally never showed up to these things. Carol Henderson opened the meeting looking like she had not slept in days. As you all know, there have been some developments regarding the board, she started. Deborah Patterson has resigned from her position effective immediately. The remaining board members, myself and Linda Patterson, are working with our attorney to address the situation. You mean the embezzlement? Someone called out. Carol flinched. Yes. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement. We have also hired a new accounting firm to audit all HOA finances. What about the lawsuit against Kevin Garrison? Beth Martinez asked. Carol looked at me, then away. We are in discussions with Mr. Garrison's attorney about resolving that matter. Translation. They are going to drop the fines and pay my legal fees, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A few people clapped. Carol did not deny it. The board believes it is in everyone's best interest to settle the dispute and move forward. What about all the other bogus fines Deborah issued? Jim asked. Are those being refunded? We are reviewing all enforcement actions from the past 3 years, Carol said carefully. If fines were assessed improperly, they will be refunded. The meeting went on for another hour, with resident after resident standing up to share their own stories of Deborah's overreach. The basketball hoop that was too close to the street. The mailbox that was the wrong color. the Halloween decorations, Christmas lights that were allegedly too bright, a kid's swing set that was supposedly visible from the street and therefore not allowed. It painted a picture of someone who had been drunk on power for years, and everyone had just tolerated it because fighting seemed like too much trouble, until someone finally fought back. The settlement came through 2 weeks later. The HOA agreed to rescind all fines against me, pay my legal fees, and issue a formal apology. They also agreed to review and properly vote on all existing rules and requirements, eliminating anything that had not been properly adopted. As part of the settlement, I agreed not to pursue additional damages against the HOA itself. Though Deborah was still facing criminal charges independently, Graham called to congratulate me. "You did good, Kevin. Most people would have just paid the fine and moved on." I was tired of being pushed around. "Well, you pushed back pretty effectively. How does it feel?" "Honestly, kind of exhausting. I just wanted to have firewood delivered." He laughed. "That is how these things go. You were not looking for a fight, but once it found you, you handled it right." Deborah's criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. I did not follow it closely, but Graham kept me updated since I was potentially going to be called as a witness. The embezzlement charges were solid. Between the forensic accounting and the paper trail, there was no real defense. Her attorney tried to argue that it was sloppy bookkeeping rather than intentional theft, but the amounts were too large and the pattern too clear. She had been systematically siphoning money from the HOA for years. In March, she pleaded guilty to 1 count of third-degree larceny and 2 counts of fraudulent accounting. The plea deal involved restitution of the full amount stolen, plus probation and community service. She avoided jail time, but barely. The local news covered the sentencing. I watched it at home, seeing Deborah standing in front of the judge looking nothing like the aggressive woman who had confronted Eddie in my driveway. She looked small and defeated. I did not feel good about it exactly. I had not set out to ruin anyone's life, but I also did not feel bad. She had brought this on herself by abusing her position and then doubling down when confronted. The HOA itself went through a major restructuring. Carol and Linda both resigned from the board. A special election was held and 3 new board members were voted in, including Jim Martinez. They immediately set about fixing the problems Deborah had created. All the questionable rules were reviewed. Most were eliminated. The legitimate ones were put to a proper vote at a special meeting where 70% of residents actually showed up, which the property manager said was a record. The delivery form requirement was killed unanimously. So were about a dozen other petty regulations that Deborah had invented. The new board also implemented better financial controls, with regular audits and 2 signatures required on all checks over $500. Jim called me one evening in April. "Hey, we are having a board meeting next week to finalize the new bylaws. Any interest in joining the board? We have 1 open seat." "Absolutely not," I said immediately. He laughed. "I figured, but I had to ask. You did kind of save the HOA from itself." "I just wanted my firewood." "Yeah, well, your firewood ended up exposing years of fraud and abuse, so thanks for that. Anytime." Eddie stopped by that same week with another delivery, 2 more cords of oak, because I had burned through most of the original load over the winter. "Hey man," he greeted me. "No angry HOA lady this time." "No angry HOA lady," I confirmed. "You should be safe." He grinned and started unloading. "Marcus still tells that story at company meetings, you know. About the crazy HOA president who tried to stop a firewood delivery and ended up getting arrested. I am sure he embellishes it." "Oh, absolutely. Last time I heard him tell it, there were like 6 police cars and a SWAT team." I laughed. The reality was a lot more boring. Just lawyers and paperwork. Still a good story, though. Eddie finished the delivery without incident. No confrontations, no police, no drama, just a straightforward business transaction the way it should have been the first time. I spent that evening stacking the new firewood next to the remains of the old delivery. The physical work was satisfying, and the spring air was cool enough that I did not overheat. As I worked, Beth and Jim walked by with their dog. "How is the firewood situation?" Beth called over. "Much better now," I replied. "I bet. Hey, we are having a neighborhood cookout next month. Now that Deborah is gone, people actually want to socialize again. You should come." "I will think about it." They waved and continued their walk. I went back to stacking wood, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. When I first moved to Maple Ridge, I had been looking for a quiet place to live while I worked from home. The HOA had seemed like a minor annoyance at most, something to tolerate in exchange for a well-maintained neighborhood. I had not expected to end up in a legal battle that would expose embezzlement and result in arrests. I had not set out to reform the HOA or become some kind of neighborhood hero. I had just wanted to have firewood delivered. But sometimes standing up for something small leads to bigger changes. Sometimes refusing to back down when someone abuses their authority ends up helping a lot of people who were too tired or scared to fight back themselves. The lawsuit had cost me time and stress, but in the end, my legal fees were covered and the neighborhood was better off. Deborah was facing consequences for her actions. The HOA was being run properly for the first time in years. And I could have firewood delivered without anyone threatening to tow the truck. All things considered, that seemed like a win. The following months passed quietly. I settled into a routine of work, occasional neighborhood events, and regular firewood deliveries as needed. Eddie always made a joke about checking for angry HOA presidents before unloading, but it was always just that, a joke. The new HOA board proved to be remarkably competent. They focused on actual maintenance issues rather than petty complaints. The neighborhood roads got repaired. The common areas were properly landscaped. The annual budget was published online with clear accounting. It was, in other words, how an HOA was supposed to function. I ran into Deborah Patterson once at the grocery store. It was awkward. She started to say something, then stopped, then finally just nodded and moved on. I did not blame her for being embarrassed. Her sister had committed crimes while she was on the board, and Linda had either not noticed or not cared enough to check. Either way, it was not a good look. Carol Henderson moved away that summer. I heard she and her husband bought a condo in Florida. No HOA, according to Jim, who seemed to keep track of neighborhood gossip better than I did. Deborah's house went up for sale in June. It sold quickly to a young couple with 2 kids. They seemed nice enough, and their kids immediately made friends with other children on the street. Life went on. The legal case became something people in the neighborhood referenced occasionally. Remember when Kevin took down the HOA? Or back when Deborah was running her scam? It became part of the community history, the time when things got bad enough that someone finally pushed back. I got asked a few times if I would run for the HOA board. Each time, I politely declined. I had no interest in spending my evenings in meetings arguing about landscaping standards. I had done my part by forcing accountability. Actually, running the thing was someone else's job. In September, almost a year after the original Firewood incident, Marcus asked me to come by the Garrison Lumber and Supply main office. I drove over on a Saturday morning, curious about what he wanted. "I have been thinking," he said after we had grabbed coffee from the break room. That whole situation with your HOA last year, it got me thinking about how we handle residential deliveries. Okay, I said carefully. We get pushback from HOAs sometimes. Not often, but it happens. Usually we just reschedule or have the customer pick up at our yard. But after seeing how you handled yours, I am wondering if we should have a more formal process. Like what? Like knowing what the actual rules are, having information about residential delivery rights. Maybe even having a legal contact for drivers if someone tries to prevent a delivery. I nodded slowly. That is not a bad idea. Eddie should not have been put in that position. He was just trying to do his job. Exactly. And if another customer has an HOA president who goes off the rails, I want our drivers to know they are backed up. We will handle the legal stuff if needed. You are going to make me the point person on this, are not you? Marcus grinned. You have experience now. One case does not make me an expert. No, but you know more than anyone else here, and you have Graham's contact information. I sighed, but I could not really argue with the logic. Fine, but I am not riding along on deliveries to argue with HOA people. Deal. So I ended up creating a set of guidelines for Garrison lumber drivers about residential deliveries and HOA issues. It was basically a summary of what I had learned, what the actual laws were, and when to call for backup versus when to just reschedule. Graham reviewed it and added some legal language. We printed it as a laminated card that drivers could keep in their trucks. Eddie was the first one to get a copy. This is pretty cool, he said, reading through it. Wish we had this last year. We are learning as we go, I told him. Think it will actually help? Probably. Most HOA disputes are based on people not knowing what the rules actually are. If our drivers have accurate information, they can push back when someone is making stuff up. Like Deborah. The following winter was harsh. Connecticut got hit with 3 major snowstorms in January alone, and I went through Firewood faster than expected. I ended up ordering an extra delivery in February. Eddie showed up with the truck on a Tuesday afternoon. He hopped out, saw me waiting, and called out, "All clear." No HOA drama. All clear, I confirmed. He unloaded the wood quickly and efficiently. As he was securing the truck, he said, "You know, I have made probably 200 deliveries since your situation last year. Not one problem with an HOA. Maybe they heard what happened and decided to behave. Maybe. Or maybe Deborah was just a special kind of crazy. Probably that." He handed me the tablet to sign the delivery receipt. As I was signing, he added, "For what it is worth, everyone at the company thinks what you did was cool, standing up to that kind of stuff. Marcus talks about it sometimes in meetings, using it as an example of backing up our customers." "I was backing up myself," I said. "You just happened to work for my family business. Still counts." After he drove away, I spent the rest of the afternoon stacking the new firewood. The sky was gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. The wood would keep me warm through whatever winter threw at Connecticut next. As I worked, I thought about how strange the past year had been. I had moved to Maple Ridge looking for a quiet place to live. Instead, I had ended up in a legal battle that exposed embezzlement and led to criminal charges. I had not wanted any of it. I just wanted to be left alone. But sometimes life does not work that way. Sometimes you have to fight back against unreasonable people doing unreasonable things. Sometimes standing your ground makes a difference not just for you, but for everyone else who is being pushed around by the same bully. Would I do it again if I had to? Absolutely. Would I have preferred to just have my firewood delivered without drama? Also, absolutely. But given the choice between backing down and standing up, I would stand up every time, even if it was just about firewood. That evening, I built a fire in my fireplace, using wood from the original delivery, the one that had started everything. The oak burned clean and hot, filling the house with warmth. I sat in my living room with a book and a glass of whiskey, listening to the fire crackle. Outside, snow had started to fall, light flakes drifting past the windows. It was peaceful. No HOA drama. No legal battles. No angry board presidents making up rules. Just me, my house, and a properly delivered stack of firewood. Exactly what I had wanted all along. The years that followed were uneventful, at least in terms of HOA conflicts. The new board continued to function properly. Violations were handled fairly and according to actual rules. Fines were rare and only issued for legitimate problems after proper hearings. Jim served 2 terms on the board before stepping down, saying he had done his part. New people cycled through, all of them committed to keeping the association functional but not overbearing. I stayed involved just enough to keep an eye on things. I attended the annual meetings, voted on budget issues, and occasionally provided input when the board was considering new rules. But I never joined the board itself. I liked my boundaries. Garrison lumber and supply continued to grow. The driver guidelines I had created became standard practice, and Marcus reported that they had helped avoid several potential conflicts with HOAs in other neighborhoods. A few times, drivers had pulled out the laminated cards and educated HOA representatives about what the actual rules were, preventing situations from escalating. Knowledge, it turned out, was a pretty good defense against petty tyranny. Eddie eventually got promoted to a dispatcher position, though he still filled in on deliveries sometimes. Every time he came by my house, he made the same joke about checking for HOA ambushes, and every time I rolled my eyes and told him to just unload the wood. It became our routine. 3 years after the original incident, I was at a community event when a new resident approached me. Her name was Sarah, and she had just moved into the neighborhood with her husband and young son. "Are you Kevin Garrison?" she asked. "I am. I heard about what you did with the HOA. When I was doing research before we bought our house, someone mentioned it. They said this used to be a really difficult neighborhood, but it got better after you sued the board." I shrugged. I did not sue to make things better. I sued because they were trying to fine me for a bogus violation. Still, it made a difference. The HOA here is actually reasonable, and apparently that was not always the case. No, it was not. So, thank you for fighting back. It made this a better place to live. I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She smiled and moved on to talk to other neighbors. Later, I thought about her words. Had I made the neighborhood better? I supposed in a way I had, though it was not my intention. I had just been defending my own interests, pushing back against someone who was abusing their authority. But the ripple effects had been real. The HOA was better run. Residents were not being harassed with fake violations. The finances were clean and transparent, all because I had refused to accept being fined for having firewood delivered. It was strange how small moments could lead to larger changes. A delivery truck in a driveway, a confrontation with an overzealous HOA president, a decision to fight back instead of just paying a fine and moving on. None of it had been part of any grand plan. It had just been a series of choices, each one leading to the next. But looking back, I was glad I had made those choices. Glad I had stood my ground. Glad I had not let Deborah Patterson or anyone else push me around just because they had a title and a binder full of rules. The principle mattered. Not because I was trying to be a hero or make a statement, but because backing down would have meant accepting that might makes right, that whoever has a little bit of authority can abuse it without consequences. That was not a world I wanted to live in, so I had fought, and I had won. and the neighborhood was better for it. Years later, when people asked me about the HOA situation, I always told the same story. It started with Firewood. It ended with embezzlement charges and a complete HOA restructuring. And in between was a lot of stubbornness, some good legal advice, and a refusal to accept injustice even over something as small as a firewood delivery. Because sometimes the small things matter most. Sometimes standing up for your right to have oak logs delivered to your driveway is really about standing up for everyone's right to be treated fairly. Sometimes firewood is just firewood, and sometimes it is the spark that lights a much bigger fire. I still live in Maple Ridge. I still order firewood from Garrison Lumber and Supply. Eddie still delivers it sometimes, still makes his jokes, still tells new drivers about the time an HOA president tried to stop a delivery and ended up in handcuffs. The story has grown in the telling, as stories do. But the core of it remains true. I wanted firewood delivered. Someone tried to stop me. I fought back. And in the end, justice was served. Not bad for a Tuesday afternoon in November. Not bad at all.